Welcome back. I am certainly excited and very curious for this next panel. And this is how we foster civil discourse in an era dominated by misinformation. Now, to help answer this pressing question, we welcome two leading voices in the fields of technology and democracy. Deb Roy, right here to my immediate left, and Rajiv Vinnakota in a conversation moderated by Lee Hill to the far left with a nice hanky right there. Executive editor at GBH News and a member of the board of directors of the Trust Project. Now, Deb and Raj will explore the evolving role of, get this, artificial intelligence in shaping the future of civil discourse. Very interesting. Now, Deb, he's an expert in AI and media. He's a professor of media arts and sciences at MIT and a director of the MIT Center for Constructive Communication. His work focuses on the intersection of technology and human interaction, designing human AI systems that build what's called civic muscle by encouraging interactive conversations. He is also the co-founder of Cortico, which I took a look at. Very interesting. A nonprofit that supports a conversation platform aimed at amplifying underrepresented voices and fostering expansive dialogue networks. Now, joining him is Raj. He's a national leader in civic education and the president of the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. Under his leadership, the Institute prepares young people to engage thoughtfully and confidently in public discourse. Very important. Helping them navigate misinformation and engage in challenging conversations that are essential to a healthy democracy. Now, together, this dynamic duo will share insights on both technology and education and how they play a role in bridging divides and revitalizing public dialogue. We want to give special thanks to the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations for their philanthropic support for this particular panel discussion. The GBH Media Summit is honored to host this important conversation on strengthening discourse in the digital age. So now, Lee, take it away, my man. I'm passing the baton to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's very quiet in here. Hello. All right. Thank you, Brother Alberto. As you said, this is a conversation about speaking across the divide. We're talking about civil discourse and trust in media in an AI-driven world. All right. Are y'all ready? Okay. I feel like we're so far apart. I don't know. It's like the great divide is right here. All right. Let's go. Let's start with some data. So Gallup has a study showing that trust in media is at a record low, with only 31% of Americans expressing confidence in journalists to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. And so do you feel like misinformation is the catalyst or the outcome of distrust? Sometimes it's hard to tell, or both.
Well, thanks for having me. I think that it's a tough question. It's a good opening question. I think it's both. It's messy. I think there's underlying factors that certainly in the United States have been decades in building distrust. To use my colleague Kathy Kramer's phrase of the politics of resentment of at least the perception of unfair allocation of resources and respect, and other, I think, underlying factors that lead to distrust in various institutions, including media. Layer on the fragmentation of media, which we have a lot of conversations about, and we think about the internet and social media, which certainly are probably the most extreme example of fragmentation. But going back to the emergence of talk radio, of the splintering of television through cable television, various technologies actually that enable us to self-select the media diets that we choose and have less and less overlap in terms of what we hear. And finally, I'll just say the dissolving of the gatekeepers of media, where anyone who's got a smartphone now can actually build an audience through social media. You put all these pieces together, and it creates a kind of weakened environment where the ability to discern a trusted media brand, where things look very similar in your social media feed. All of these are different elements, and then I have to add one last element, which is in this weakened state, it's a real opportunity for conflict entrepreneurs to inject bullshit into the system. It's a lot easier for it to spread when you don't have the kind of cohesive information system that maybe if we look back half a century ago, we had.
I think one of the ways of looking at this is also to recognize that there's larger forces of anti-institutionalism that's really going on, right? So think about the institutions that used to help form our worldviews and so on. I mean, it's everything that Deb just said. And as those forces are also playing in, people just have questions about all of the institutions that they used to go to. Then you have AI that's been taught on the last 20 plus years of the internet, plus whatever Putin's henchmen are telling them to say. And so you've got a lot of misinformation, conflict entrepreneurs, and it really becomes an accelerant.
Yeah, let's stay there for a minute and talk about the institution of the internet. So we often hear of AI as sort of being a threat to the truth. Deb, specifically for you, what role do you think AI-powered tools can play in actually rebuilding trust in media and combating misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, first of all, just to think about AI, it's a moving target. I'm guessing, pretty much everyone here has played with some form of AI explicitly through a large language model like ChatGPT, but also it's being embedded in so many different services that we're using every day. So first of all, AI is already kind of pervasive as a kind of technology that is in so many different ways in our lives already. A way to think about what I in particular in our group at MIT focuses on are large language models and AI for language processing. That like any language technology, if you go back to, depending on how you define language technology, might include the spoken word, but certainly the written word and the printing press and radio and so forth. They're all amplifying in various ways language which can be used in various ways. So it's an extraordinarily powerful but also extraordinarily general purpose technology. So I'll just give you 3 examples just drawing from our own work. How can you build trust? We think about for a journalist or a newsroom, how to more effectively listen to those that you're trying to reach, how to better understand, how to better share or reach audiences. So just on listening, again, just one simple example, we've been experimenting with and worked effectively with journalists on AI tools that help journalists restate a question in a way that opens up a space for people in communities to share experiences that can be easier for someone who doesn't have a strong opinion or expertise about a topic to still engage on any issue that relates to their lives. There's a way of asking these questions and creating a space for listening that we've effectively used AI as a kind of collaborator to come up with better ways to ask questions.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, in general, so if you have a topic like a hot button topic like immigration, to move away from asking what's your opinion about the issue to what's an experience you've had that informs or that's related to your opinion. But just those pivots and using also the choice of words or language that are more likely to not be a trigger or use language that might have unintended connotations for who you're trying to bring into conversation. We all have blind spots, including, again, if you're a journalist or a newsroom, someone in the newsroom, to have these AI tools to help you find a framing to open up for listening. I'll just quickly, to understand, there are extraordinarily powerful ways to find patterns and notice commonalities across different conversations, different groups. This is, again, an area we've explored quite deeply. So kind of sense-making using AI as a tool to help find patterns that might be difficult to find otherwise. And then when it comes to sharing, again, back to how do you frame a message that you want to reach an audience, there are ways to use AI tools that can actually understand media diets of others. So an audience member or a group that you're trying to reach that might have a media diet and therefore a way of understanding the world that is different than the messenger, different than the journalist, that these tools can actually help you step out of your perspective and and anticipate and reframe and be able to connect better with audiences. So these are 3 examples. There are countless others because it is a general purpose and very powerful technology.
So pause here for a plug. We're actually going to invite AI into this conversation in a little bit, so stay tuned for that. So speaking to bringing us together, I recently read that 6 in 10 Americans, 6 in 10, see political polarization as a critical threat to American democracy. And I will just say, this is personal, in my own family, we have people who are no longer speaking to each other because of political differences. Raj, a question for you. In your work, what strategies have you seen be most effective in bringing people together from opposite ideological perspectives to engage in meaningful dialogue? I know you have something to share.
Well, I have lots to share about this, exactly. I'm like, one of the things I'd just advise you is to stay in community. Force your family to have more dinners together.
Yeah, that's right.
That's easier said than done, I get it. But part of it is understanding that spending more time together actually leads you to recognize your shared humanity. And that is really, really important when it comes to being able to engage across different. Because it's too easy to just start talking about the other side as evil or wrong and start to really move away from understanding that we're actually talking about human beings. You look at the major programs that are involved in this, Constructive Dialogue Institute, Braver Angels, and so on. They all start from the notion of dignity and respect, curiosity. I mean, Deb was actually talking about those very things in some of his answers. But, I mean, I would challenge even this group. How much do you respect people who voted differently than you in the 2016 election, the 2020 election, the 2024 election, right? There's a tendency to think of the other side as either delusional, evil, or something different. And that does not begin from a sense of shared humanity, that we are human beings who are part of a community, right? I'm not suggesting that's easy, right? That's actually very difficult to do, but that has to be part of the starting point. The second part is to also start to look for commonality, but at the same time, look for commonality through unlikely alliances. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you just a little story. In 2019, I led a national study to rethink civic education in this country. I found the prior panel really illuminating. It was exciting to hear about it. But one of the things that I did to start that off is I went to get a group of funders who were going to be an unlikely alliance. And so I ended up being able to get the project to be funded by the Hewlett Foundation, Michael Bloomberg, and Charles and David Koch. And I did that because I wanted to jog people's expectations, right? I didn't want people to think just, around their preconceptions and assumptions, but rather say, oh, wait, that's an interesting group. Wait, why would they come together and create curiosity and get people to actually start to be willing to talk to us, right? So creating unlikely alliances, working and challenging people's preconceived notions is also really important. And the third and final thing that a lot of research has determined is that you can't engage in civil discourse, right? The notion of being able to talk across difference and get to know each other simply as an end in itself. The research shows that in order for that to become durable for time, especially for young people, but in general, is you then have to translate into actually trying to solve problems. That is, you need to work across difference and say, how about we go and try to solve a problem? It doesn't need to be a huge problem. You don't need to solve climate change, but maybe for students, it's, hey, we have a difference of opinion around an issue here on our residence hall. Let's get to know each other, talk a little bit more, and then let's go try to solve it. That's what helps you actually build the civic muscle to do this.
So I'd like for you to take that advice and transpose it for journalists in journalism.
Okay. Look, the unlikely alliances one would be interesting, right? What if we had 2 or 3 different news sources that don't ever usually work together and say, we're going to go do a series of pieces on X or Y where there's real conflict or disagreement, but it's not the usual very progressive or very conservative, very libertarian pieces, but maybe it's 2 or 3 of those different newsmakers coming together and trying to do this. I think that really starts to challenge the preconceptions and say, they're going to look at this differently, and people will be willing to trust it because there's some part of that group that they say, wait, I actually believe in them. Maybe I should go listen to this.
So I want to introduce a little more data here. I'm a data nerd. So Tufts University, they have a Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, and they have found, this was a study that just dropped, I think, earlier this month, that a majority of young people are civically disengaged and that nearly a third are checked out and are really struggling to locate themselves in this version of democracy. And I think, their study has that those differences are even more pronounced along race and gender lines. 58% of white women, young white women, voted in this election compared to only 25% of black men. So do those statistics surprise you at all? What do you make of that?
They don't surprise me an iota. Think about it. When you're talking about this younger generation, we have a group of young people who see in front of them truly existential issues. Things like climate change, the changing nature of work from AI and other things, issues like gun control that are near and dear to them, and so on and so forth. And they see a political class that is solving none of those problems. And then you ask them, do you believe in democracy? Well, guess what? Their response is going to be, I don't see this democracy solving any of the existential problems that I see right in front of me. So to then expect them to say, yes, democracy is what I'm for, it is not surprising to me at all. You add on top of that the fact that there's really not a lot of role modeling of the behaviors we want to see in terms of compromise and governing and so on, right? Deb talked about the notion of conflict entrepreneurs, right? There's many of them around. And so you both have neither the solutions nor the role modeling in our democracy that you need to see for people to say, oh yeah, I actually believe in this.
So how do we inspire and sustain civic engagement among young people? What do you think is the answer for both of you?
Sure. I mean, I think that, just building on Raj's point, that when all of the forces seem distant and that there's no meaningful personal action that I can take. By the way, this is an answer that I'd give for why young people are disengaged, but it's also a reason I give for why most of us are disengaged. Right. This is probably, I don't know if you have data on, is it worse for youth versus for the rest of us? But the same problem, which is, and when I say meaningful personal action, it's a personal action, which means it's one that I have the ability to take that action. I've got agency, and I can decide to take my time and attention, and I've got the skills, and I can take that action. So it's a personal action, and it's meaningful. When I look around at these larger forces, whether it's AI, what it's going to mean when the AI can ace every test that I'm studying hard as a kid in school to learn. Why am I learning? Where is this all heading? What do I do about any of these large issues if the actions I can take don't seem to connect in any way to these larger questions? Then the actions I can take are not meaningful. So that combination of meaningful personal action is a kind of recipe for being able to build that civic muscle, have the motivation to build that civic muscle. And so I think that when we're looking just at the national or global issues, it's very difficult for any of us to know how to engage. So building the local feedback loops, the local ways to engage, but not just stay local, but connected to something bigger, is, I think, the path to being able to re-engage or engage in the first place.
So going back to the whole question of the political and ideological divide, I think that what we're also seeing is a real empathy gap right now. And so I wonder, Deb, back to you as it relates to AI, how do we cultivate human empathy and nuance that these algorithms, struggle to replicate? AI can't teach empathy. At least I don't think, unless you have some new information for us today.
Right. Well, I mean, I think in the end, when you talk about empathy, we're really talking about, I assume you mean empathy between humans.
That's
right.
So,
thinking about as we're looking at the role of AI and how it's permeating our lives, and we do have the ability, and this is some of the work that we do in our, both in our nonprofit and our center, is we design systems and we build tools that embed AI. We're always asking, what are we optimizing for? What's the purpose of this tool? And one of the things about AI that's so powerful that any job to be done by a person that involves processing language, making decisions based on what people are communicating. A lot of the elements of any kind of a program to build empathy or communication, a lot of the things that Raj is talking about, when you look at it just from an information processing point of view, what are the jobs to be done? It looks like, hey, the AI can do it. Let me plug it in. Why? It's cheaper. It's faster. Well, then you're just optimizing for systems that are cheap and fast. Yeah. But building civic muscle, building empathy, sometimes we need to slow things down. We need to create a kind of purposeful friction, which comes naturally if we say, well, we're not just optimizing for efficiency. We're also optimizing for, use the phrase, civic muscle. We use it as well. So what is civic muscle? These are skills to actually enable stronger human connection, to enable empathy. So this might mean, you talked about dialogue. How do I actually create space for others to hear and be heard by one another? Well, that's a skill. You need to learn how to create that space. You need to know how to create opportunities for people to engage with one another, know how to read the group when someone is reluctant to share, right? To not pressure them, but to create space for them. All these, so you need to learn how to facilitate a conversation. You might learn how to be a sense maker, and this doesn't require technology, but learning how to interpret and understand, wait, you think you have nothing in common, but what you just shared there, that I heard a commonality, I heard a theme, to be able to lift that up. These are all skills that we put under the umbrella of civic muscle, how to facilitate, how to sense make, how to tell the story of stories, share that with others, build community. These are very different than just measuring for efficiency. And so as we think about the role of AI in these tools, having that basic question of what values guide us and how are we making choices for where we think about the division of labor, certainly when it comes to something like building empathy between humans and machines, I think is critical.
Raj, on the empathy gap.
Yeah, so actually two major thoughts here. The first, just on empathy, is and connecting this back into misinformation. Like, facts don't beat facts. I mean, that's just not the way. I mean, people may say, like, hey, let's get more information now and so on. Like, the way in which you actually win is through storytelling. Because we make decisions and we think through stories, through kind of the affective domain, through our emotional connection. So Deb even just talked about it now, right? The way in which the human mind works is actually, right, we emotionally make a decision, and then we largely go and rationalize it, right? That's not always the case, right? I'd hope that, I'm a molecular biologist by training. That's not how I made my decisions in the lab, right? I actually did look at the data first and then afterwards. But by and large, as human beings, that's not the way we're wired. We're wired to actually think about things emotionally. And the way in which we get best, closest, and most strongly to emotion is through storytelling. And so figuring out how and what stories we tell each other is the way in which we get both to that empathy gap and also how we start to get at mis and disinformation. If you just say, oh, my fact is this and my fact is that, you're not going to actually win over time. You have to figure out the stories. Do you mind if I just go one other place? So the other place is really, frankly, all of the work that we do at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, and we do it in 3 different places. We do it in colleges, we do it in the workforce, and we do it directly in the community supporting young individuals. And in all 3 of those places, what we're trying to do is teach and build the civic muscles of young people who are trying to solve problems in their community, in working across difference in the most diverse environment most of them will ever be in, which is in colleges, in higher ed, in that dorm room, in that classroom, and also in the workforce, where employers are telling us over and over again that they need young employees who can actually talk across difference and actually go solve a problem together. So building that muscle in very different ways, but still building that muscle allows you over time to start seeing the shared humanity. The fact that you're working with different people isn't a problem, it actually is better.
Can you think of a time when being in community or participating in civic dialogue has changed your mind about something?
Yeah. Now, I want to say just for a moment, right, just to kind of contextualize it, right? Once again, I'm not talking about a fact versus a fact, right?
Yeah.
So I'll say, wow, that's red. And someone will tell me, no, Raj, you're red-green colorblind. That's actually green. And I'll be like, okay, you're right, right? But that's not what I'm saying. Like, when you're thinking about changing minds it takes time. So let me give you the best example, which happened to me over the course of 2021. I, for a really long time, drew a line about whom I would engage with in my work. And one of those lines was, if you thought that the 2020 election was stolen, then I am not going to work with you, because you are a conflict entrepreneur, and so on. As I started to engage across the country, especially with faculty members in colleges and universities, I started to recognize something. I was not understanding the fact that many people in this country grew up in different information bubbles than mine. And if they grew up with information telling them from their parents, from their families, from their newscast, from their community that the election was stolen, why should I be surprised when they show up on a college campus and tell me that the election was stolen? That, for me, was an evolution. And I needed to recognize that, and I needed to change my mind in the whole way in which I approached that. It also then forced me to rethink, well, how do I think about those information bubbles? What assumptions am I making, and how do I need to change them?
Yeah, I guess it's a great question. And I was just thinking about after the 2016 election, I started a collaboration. I mentioned her already, Kathy Kramer, who's a political scientist, lives and works in Wisconsin. And I had this real worry that some of the people that she had built connections with through her field work and her research, listening in small communities in rural Wisconsin, that tended to be more politically conservative than the People's Republic of Cambridge, where I come in and work every day, that I had this worry that some of the people that Kathy Kramer knew and worked with were being manipulated, were being brainwashed by media sources that I would never turn to. And I actually had the opportunity I guess it was in 2018, to go out and actually meet and spend time and break bread with some of these folks. And the thing that I think this counts as changing my mind, what I realized was they were worried about the same about people like me. And this kind of symmetry of this concern and just kind of a realization that no one wants to be duped and to be fed the wrong kind of information. And there's actually a kind of concern that's symmetric. So it changed, it complicated the narrative, certainly for me, for how I thought about other groups, and also just how difficult it was to convince someone to sit down and spend a couple of hours together. Why should they? And how do you actually bridge those divides ourselves? It took an enormous effort, but that was something that really, I want to come back to a question you asked, Lee, at the beginning about, what can. And you use this statistic of 6 in 10 people think we're too politically polarized. That there's a wonderful phrase, Todd Rose, who was at Harvard for many years, wrote a book called The Collective Illusion. This idea that that we collectively can reinforce an illusion, something that's actually not true. And in our own work, when we have these small group conversations, very much focused on sharing of stories. I was talking about these AI tools to help come up with prompts, which enable people to easily share experiences, moments in their life, and create these kinds of experiences that we actually have much more in common, much more in our shared humanity than actually the media and all of the amplification that happens that picks out the most extreme perspectives. This is true in social media. It's also true in most media just because of the incentive structures. Really hard problem. And I'm not citing that poll as part of the problem, but it kind of is. This is what we're trapped in, right? To say, if you hear enough times that 6 out of 10 of us think we are extremely polarized, soon that'll play a causal role in being 7 of us. And so this idea of a collective illusion.
6 out of 10 of my family members are politically polarized.
But I think this is the challenge that the business model of media wants to find those extreme points, and right now it's difficult to take our eyes off of the fact that we seem so polarized. But I think the challenge here, certainly, where on the ground, in terms of the sort of interactions that we know are possible between small groups, that something very different emerges. And then I think shifting the focus to problems that matter, but where there's actually common cause, is part of the, I think, where we need to go.
And so I've had that experience because I lived in Washington, D.C. for 25 years and then moved to a small town of 8,000 people in Maine in 2019. And one of the most eye-opening aspects of living in this small town is recognizing just how little politics actually matters. And that, in Washington, D.C., where it is literally everything and anything all the time, to recognizing that, my daughter plays on a club volleyball team, and, we've been friends with these 8 other families, for the last 4 years, traveled all around the country, played, and so on and so forth. I am absolutely sure that we split somewhere down the middle on the 2020 and the 2024 election. Yet if any of those parents called me and said, can you help me or my daughter, I'd get in the car immediately, no questions asked, anything like that. And so I think that we also are at risk of overplaying the political polarization and suggesting somehow or the other that we still can't live in, therefore we can't live in community, which is absolutely untrue. And I think that's something that we need to get back, right? We need to recommit to the notion of a shared humanity, of living in community together. One of the things that worries me sometimes about technology is it moves so fast, right? It doesn't move at the speed of humans, right? And when we want to build relationships, that's the speed we need to move at.
Deb, I want to go back to something you said, and specifically, for journalists, what advice do you have for us on how we might have AI sort of mediated public dialogues? How can we become better using technology?
Yeah, so again, I think starting with if the goal is, and I think as we discussed before, building trust, right, and trustworthy processes, to start first with the human relationship between those journalists, and your audience. When I just think about, when I look at a news source, what questions would I ask? Do I see my perspective, people with life experiences like mine, reflected in the journalism? Are the stories framed in a way where they're relevant to me, right? Do people I trust the source? That's a hard one, right? So these are some of the questions. Notice,
do people, say that again, do people I trust you, basically? Trust the source.
Trust the source.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will, everything I think about how we make decisions for what to trust, most of what we trust and we rely on, none of us in this room have the expertise, right, to verify, other than Raj.
No.
Yeah, he's left. And so there's networks of trust that we rely on, and so much of the medicine we take, right, the decisions we make, the airplane we get on, the technology we trust, we don't have any way to verify ourselves, but it's based on networks of trust that we turn to, and so that is certainly the case for media. By the way, Lee, I noticed you asked about AI, and I gave an answer that didn't have the word AI in it, because AI, it's kind of like technology more generally. It can be brought in various ways, and absolutely it's moving so fast. There's right now, I think, a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of risk. So I'll just give one example of how we think very carefully, and I think journalists should as well. As I think everyone here knows, you can ask a large language model to draft a first draft of anything you can imagine, any news story, any piece of content, to come up with a narrative, in extraordinary ways. I think the more that a person who is meant to be communicating to an audience is actually handing those jobs up to the AI and not disclosing how they're using the AI, I think it's a recipe for losing trust, right? And so that kind of transparency around where the AI is being used, most importantly in anything that mediates the connection between two humans, where a journalist and the editor and everyone in the newsroom are humans, right? That it's really important to disclose, not to avoid using it, but to disclose how it's being used. Otherwise, I think there's risk.
So speaking of disclosure, I've asked AI to join me as a moderator in this next round of questions. So these questions are tailored specifically for you and your experience, focused on this theme. So I'm calling this our AI lightning round of questions. Cue the music. There is none. Okay, so Deb, this is for you. This is AI. You've studied online, and I also asked it to add humor. So here we go. So, Deb, you've studied online conversations extensively. Is there a data set somewhere that proves we will one day stop arguing in all caps in the comment section, asking for humanity? That's AI.
You're going to have to read that again.
Is there a data set somewhere that proves we'll one day stop arguing in all caps in the comments section, asking for humanity? I think this speaks to sort of the rancor of the moment and how intense things are.
As someone filled with hope, I would say yes, it just has not been created yet. Let's see what the AI says to that.
Okay. Another AI question for you, Deb. Can predictive models tell us when society will finally stop doom scrolling? Or are we all just waiting for an algorithm to pop up and say, you've reached the end of the internet, go outside?
Closer to the latter, but I'm gonna we're gonna have to make a little room for human agency here and say, no, you can't predict the future from the past, as long as we don't accidentally put ourselves on autopilot. And I think, so with all joking aside, this is another way to put the key question before each of us individually in what we're doing at home, in our personal lives and at work, and certainly in the institutions we're building, which is we better be real careful what we decide to put on autopilot and what we decide to keep and under our own control.
Okay, Raj, a question for you. Have you found any, again, this is AI, this is not Lee Hill. Have you found any data-backed strategies that can actually get people from opposing political sides to agree on something? And if so, can we bottle that and sell it to Congress?
So, yes, but I don't know that Congress wants to buy it.
Good point.
Right? Because all of the incentives are to actually act in the way that they're acting right now. We do have some good ideas. We do have some actually really good programming, early stages that are going on, especially of all places, in higher education. I mentioned a few of the programs, Braver Angels, Constructive Dialogue Institute, there's a number of them, who are doing good things, teaching people to work across difference. We now need to translate that into actual problem solving and so on. But I think both of us have mentioned, Deb and I, and with thanks to Amanda Ripley about the notion of the conflict entrepreneurs. I mean, they're being incentivized to act that way. So they're not going to buy it.
Okay. AI says thank you. All right. One more. When you measure trust in institutions, do you ever come across data that just sighs and says, they're not really helping themselves, are they?
If the data isn't signed, I certainly am.
Okay.
So.
All right, Deb Roy and Raj Vinnakota, thank you so much for joining me. And special thanks to Perplexity AI and Microsoft Azure for co-hosting our AI lightning round with me. This has been fun, guys. Thank you so much.
Take care.